Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I thought I'd do something a bit more practical for you today. I'm going to talk to you about some guidance advice for making application to EU fund bids whilst it's still possible. Been something of a flurry, especially in the UK for leaving the European Union, about applying for funds, and a lot of the European Union funds are actually directed to support SME, that is small medium enterprise engagement with business, community development, etc., etc. Economic development is part of the remit of the European Union, naturally, and some of the funds are specific to businesses, small businesses, looking at anything from startups to their classification of what is a medium-sized business, which I'll get to in a second. And you can apply in your business to almost most areas. I mean, there's thematic categories and groups that the EU likes to fund, but I thought I'd give you some type of basic guidance for filling in the types of applications you get associated with European funding. Typically, these will be things like the European Regional Development Fund, which is funds allocated to particular regions of EU member states, which is part of the European Structural Fund. These are usually allocated and run through joint mixtures of universities or local authorities, typically supported by your LEP, which is your local enterprise partnership, which tend to be regional bodies. This is not legally binding. You can say the guidance is junk. Please don't sue me. This is just some advice, and take it as you will. And enjoy my floral pattern slides and denim border. I'm just going to run through a few do's and don'ts and brief recommendations for you, and I might make it about the sectors that I know to give some examples. Okay, so what can we say first? Are you eligible? A lot of the organizations that would apply for this are going to be in the small to medium enterprise category. So you would have less than 250 employees, and I'll get through this in a minute, but basically it's related to your turnover, the amount of state funded money that you've had, i.e. from the government. That typically does not include the NHS, but it does include national lottery funding, for example, if you've had that, and also your size, your turnover as well. But typically, like I said, these are funds that are allocated like the European Regional Development Fund on a particular geographical area. It could be a county, it could be something like England as well. So you have to check that you are located within the correct geographical region for the fund that you're applying for. So there might be one that's just for Cornwall, or just for Devon, or just for Cumbria. And typically when I say in, it means trading activity or registered offices. And obviously if you're running an online business, it's a bit more nebulous, but you have to demonstrate that you've got some trading activity within that geographical area. Okay, so does your organization operate in the correct sector or thematic area? And by thematic area, a lot of EU funds are around a particular topic, or what they call smart specialization. So for example, different sub-national units of an EU member state, let's say take England for example, will have different thematic areas that they work in. So through working with local government bodies and things like the LEP, local enterprise partnership, they'll decide that okay, this county or this region has this thematic theme that we want to push. So to give an easy example, Devon has a much proportionally older population demographically in England. So on average it's about 10 years older than the rest of England as a whole. So one of the thematic research topics for SMEs in Devon is healthy aging. So aging related research and businesses have this intersect where the funding can help you develop your business to proceed funding, pilot funding, projects, etc. In Cornwall it's different. In Cornwall it relates to e-health, which is the use of mobile phone apps, mobile technology and technological solutions to healthcare, and robotics, partly to do with their broadband connection work that's been done in Cornwall through the council. But again, it's a different thematic area. So does your organization operate in that correct sector or thematic area? Does your organization have less than 250 employees? So there is EU funds that work with larger businesses naturally, but nearly all businesses, if you look at the vast majority of number, are in the SME category, which is you have less than 250 employees. Does your organization have an annual turnover of less than 50 million euros, approximately 42 million pounds, which would be nice. Equally, you need to understand if your organization has balance sheets values of less than 43 million euros. And lastly, is your organisation less than 25% owned by another company or combination of companies? So that's another important thing, because we need to know who you're dealing with as a funder. Sorry, next, penultimately, and lastly, has your organisation received less than €200,000 in public funding in the last 3 years? And by public funding, typically we're talking anything out of the government. Like I said, NHS funding doesn't count, but you have to be careful when you look at where your funding comes from. It might be ultimately back to a government source, so you can have complicated funding routes. However, you can apply if you have a charitable arm to your organisation which is functioning differently, or another spin-out company from your organisation that has not received that funding. It might be possible for you to apply through that. And if you meet these criteria, you are typically eligible for European Regional Development Fund grants and other similar programs. So ERDF covers a lot of things. I can't say this is true for all European funding, but the majority of the time, if you can meet these criteria, you'll be eligible for a fund. Naturally, as I said, they're geographically located. So additional questions you might want to ask yourself. You might be eligible, but are your activities relevant to the program? People are a bit militant when you fill in their application paperwork that what you do really accords to the thematic area they want to work in. So if you're looking at healthy aging, the funder has to demonstrate at the end of the project all the outcomes of the project, and they can't give you money if you don't meet the thematic criteria that they work in. So they're unlikely to give it to you unless you are a genuine fit for that project. Are your costs eligible for the funding? So different projects and different funders have different levels of costs that can be given. The European Union, for example, does not fund direct staff time. So if you're an SME applying to a European Union fund grant, typically it might cover things like particular capital. You want to get a particular piece of equipment, maybe need some money for some training, even sometimes extending to marketing and stuff like that. But what you can't put it against is the cost for your existing staff. You can use money to buy in new staff and buy in new services, but you're not eligible to pay your overheads for your staff time for the money or for these projects typically. Can the project be delivered within the program timetable? These are typically 3-year long projects. Sometimes they can go up to 5. Sometimes the projects are extended, so you'll run a 3-year project and then there's an evaluation. But typically, you'll be looking to have a piece of work that's deliverable within a couple of years, whatever that might be. So you need to fit your work within the program timetable, within what it funds and the relevancy of the project. So guidance will also include, when you start your paperwork, you need to define what your project need is, what you're looking to do, really specifically. Spend some time writing out ideas, getting it down to as few words as possible and a crystal clear definition. You want to think about what then supporting evidence is relevant, ensuring that you've got evidence that are listed and dated. So you want to be, so if I'm reading your application, I want to be able to go and find what you cited, so dates, locations, hyperlinks, all that kind of stuff. When you download it, when you read it, the name of the journal if it's a scientific paper, etc., etc. Publisher names, where they were published. This is quite important for people chasing, the validity of your claims. Okay, make a robust case, but if in doubt, add more information rather than less. That I can almost discount things if I'm reading your application. How much evidence should you provide? Well, it really depends on several things, particularly how much support you want. If you're asking for a small amount of money, you don't need to give me, a PhD thesis of backing up what you want to do. You just need to give sufficient evidence to support the duration and financial cost of what you're going to do. So yeah, the scale of your challenge in a sense. So if you want to work on something for 2 months, or if you want to work on something for 18 months, you might give a varying level of evidence to support your claims, and varying type too. Also, again, how much money you're applying for. If you want to do, I know, £5,000 to look at a bit of piloting of an existing product you've got, that's going to be very different than how you're going to write your application form and the level of evidence you want to give. So what are the types of evidence you might want to put in an application form as an SME or business for EU funding? So statistical evidence, you can pick out census data. There's lots of UK-wide census data to pick out trends, which is useful, on demographics. Strategy and policy documents. So if you're working in a particular sector, there will be regulators, government bodies, and other, if you like, think tanks that you might want to draw from. Particularly government departments are useful. So if you work in health, Department of Health. If you work with doctors, it could be the General Medical Council, Care Quality Commission. There's tons of things. NHS England. You might have designated priorities from local councils or national councils. Any kind of professional body would be useful. Research itself, so using research databases to pull out academic research, including books, to find academic papers that point towards what you're doing and why you're doing it. If in doubt, you can just use something as simple as Google Scholar to find papers, but otherwise you'll be looking at publicly available research databases like PubMed, PsycInfo. There's tons that you can find on specific sectors. I'm talking about medicine there. If you want to have got more of a social focus in your business, you want to look at the government data on things like deprivation indexes, for example, or Office of National Statistics data is also useful in this regard. Or it can be really specific reports. So I've got some, I don't know, I might see evidence from biotechnology government survey reports. There's one from 2016, for example, that has a whole host of data. So it can be something that the government's drilled into specifically. It's got infographics or things that you might want to use to support your information. But that's not all. You can use testimonial evidence from focus groups, letters of support. Maybe you've got patient feedback, customer feedback you want to put in, any preliminary data or benchmarking that you've done. So we can look at qualitative stuff too, and that can help you in defining your aim, your activity, and your outcomes for what you want to do. Ideally, this should reflect the need identified and the impact on the people that you'll be working with or for, and the activities you'll undertake. So don't be afraid to put in both statistical evidence, but also testimonial, qualitative feedback type of evidence too. So, overview: do read the guidelines, use other help available. If there's anyone or any consultancy that you've done before, or people you've worked with who've done this, go and speak to them. If there's any support services to do the application, talk to those people, draw on the networks you have. Define your project need. That needs to be really clear at the beginning. Typically we might be very enthusiastic about our business ventures, and you'll write an application, but when you reflect on what you've written, it's an aspiration of what you want to do or reflection on what you've achieved, but that doesn't tell you what the project need is. You need to be very specific about this if possible. Focus on the project aim, how your business will grow, and how the solution you are proposing will help people in your target market. So these are important things. You need to capture that information succinctly and try and relay it in as few words as possible. Clear, succinct aims about what you want to do, who it will help, and who you're doing it to. And there's even rubrics you can use in things like data searching. There's one called PICO, which stands for Population Intervention Control and Outcome. So there's ways to structure your thinking and writing these approaches. The people who read these types of bids really don't want to read a long history of what you've achieved. They want concise information about these things. Sense check your application before submitting, i.e. read it, see what you think, see if it's like concise, as I said, and clear. You've not given a marketing pitch necessarily. In contrast to the do's, we also probably have the do nots. So we advise, or I would advise, but obviously not legally, don't jump right in and read the guidelines. Don't just request a one-to-one chat with any of the program team or people that would support you on it. The emphasis is really partly on you to do some of the legwork. So if you've got program of research funding that looks at 15 businesses over a 2-year period, they won't necessarily have enough staff to have one-to-one chats frequently with you, so you might need to do some of the legwork yourself, reading the guidance that's available. Don't see the need for your project speaks for itself. If you've been doing your work for a long time, sometimes it can be tricky to see the wood from the trees. It might be good to have someone else just check over your work, someone who's maybe not in your field, see if it makes sense to them, because sometimes you become so used to your own terminology, ways of writing, that it may not be clear to someone who's not in that area, and it's likely to an extent that the person who reads your application will not be necessarily subject matter expert. Don't forget to include sources for statistical and testimonial evidence in the correct format, hopefully. Focus on the project aims, how your business will grow and how the solutions you're proposing will help people in relation to EU smart specializations. Again, so let's really do, but make sure that you, if you can, and if you found, these are EU funds I'm talking about. EU has lots of documents about particular areas it wants to fund. There's strategy and policy documents about e-health or particular areas of interest, or the social impact of isolation, and they've got things they've written, then you can tie into the key objectives and strategy that exists. That will help tie together what you want to do with wider supranational government policy, and which your funder probably is interested in.